Let's get started. First, I want to go over just a few basic things. Now, you don't need to, but I do this. I have two bamboo styluses, and on one I have a hard nib, and then I have a soft nib on the other one. The soft's what comes with it when you buy it, but I got the hard ones on Amazon, and with the hard nib, you can get, it's a little less sensitive, and it doesn't flow as much, so it's nicer for when you want to do those straight lines, which we'll be discussing here in a minute, as opposed to the soft loose strokes that I'm going to also talk about. When I begin, I like to use the pencil brush that Pistachio, or however you pronounce it, made, and but even before that, we want to think about what we're going to draw. Even if we are using a reference or using our imagination or drawing something from memory, you need to think about what you're drawing first. Not even when you're shading, you need to think these things through, but even before you begin, for the structure, are we going to draw something that's a thick, heavy fabric? So if we're doing draperies, are we doing the winter draperies that are made with a very thick cotton or a tweed or something along that lines? Or are we doing something that's airy, loose, flowing, like with a satin, silk, mesh, whatever? Same goes with clothing and tablecloths and all other fabrics. You need to think about the structure, how it flows, particularly with even draperies and clothing. Are they going to meet at a certain point? As I've kind of very archaically drawn, and I'm going to get more into detail, I'm just going over a brief, quick overview just to kind of get us started. So don't worry, it's going to get a lot better. But see how I drew some lines coming out? You want to show where there's folds because you don't want it to be stiff. Even if it's a stiff fabric, it's not completely stiff. There are going to be parts where it pills out of the seam or whatever. And the more you add these, the more it tells you about the fabric. Is it a ruche dress around the stomach, or is it just a really fat person? And that's going to depend where you put the ruching. Obviously, on the sides, it's going to be more tight and gathered for a heavy person, but if it's just ruching, it's going to be, all across. So these are things you need to think through. Just quickly do a pre-version, this is not even finished, to show you where we're going with this before I start. Don't worry, I'm going to do it all over. This is basically the drapery treatment in my bedroom, so I thought it was a perfect beginning part because it's a stiffer fabric, but because of the way it's made, it also falls loosely, so we can introduce the whole flowing and staying with stiff fabric at the same time, so we can kind of deal with both. So I thought it was a great example. I do several shading techniques, and I just wanted to show you guys before we even begin the benefit of using the different ones, how it adds a different dimension to it. I just removed the fabric brush layer. You don't have to use that specific brush. I'm using that for the purposes of speed in this class because of time constraints, and it is kind of nifty and helpful. But sometimes, we'll get to that. Now, here's what it looks like without that layer. See how we've got the nice structure, but the overlay of the texture gives it the extra oomph. Actually, to tell the truth, I have not set a time yet because I don't know how long this is going to take. I don't want to go over an hour unless people really want to continue at that point. I'm willing, but I'm going to try to make this for, get through all the good stuff before 3 is my plan. Just removed the layer that had the cross hatching I had smudged, and I think that's why, because I know some people don't like cross hatching, and that's why I'm going through and showing you this before we go through it, just so you can understand. Really does make a difference, I think. Alright, so here you can see I made a pretty colorful outline that I'm going to use as I go through the shading. I like to use it on top, but I will hide the layer occasionally, just make sure I'm going on par. Now, for just speed's sake, I had already put the vector shape down. I used vector and then went slightly over the edges and smoothed them out with smudge. So depending how dark you want to go, I like to just go ahead and use a full black with low opacity. I really want to say now before I forget, I encourage you guys to actually take some of these techniques and experiment yourself. That's how I've actually figured out some of these things. I've taken other things and adapted them and just played around, and I figured out some really cool things. And I haven't incorporated a lot of it into my art yet, but because I haven't had much time, but I really encourage it. It's a lot of fun, and you can really figure out some really cool stuff. New feature, I don't know if you can see my brush bar when I pick them, so unless you say that you can see it, I'm just going to make a mark of the brush I'm using so you know which one it is. This is my go-to for most shadowing when I'm not cross-hatching. But this is my preferred method of shadowing, because especially for fabrics. So now I'm going to go through, and even if I overgo some of the lines, we're not going to worry about that. We're probably just going to make this an on layer in a minute anyway, so it doesn't matter. And I'm just going to go through with, I'm pretty sure I picked like, what, 10% for the opacity. And we're just going to go through, and we're going to make some strokes that are stiff and soft. Depending on what it calls for, but mostly we're going to do soft because we're dealing with the wrinkles and the way it falls. And we're just going to shadow in. We don't care about this right now, we're just dealing with the main shadows. It doesn't need to be precise because that's why we're building with layers. We're going to build the shadows up. It gives it more depth. And then we are also, after we deal with the shadows, we do add in highlights, which will give it an extra dimension. Sorry, I kind of zoom in and zoom out, so I will try my best to try to make it easier to see. Yes, of course. Periodically adjusting the size. I don't know if you can see that because I'm using the bottom for that. Kind of hard with the charger. I'll see what I can do. I just use quick, kind of loose movements when I'm doing the sharp lines, but then I don't know if you can tell, but when I shadow, I kind of do a zigzagging back and forth motion. Because this is on a bar, it is pulling on the top, but it doesn't pull much. It pulls slightly because it is a sewn in bar, and so it doesn't pull as much as if it was just hanging on the bar. So we're going to have a little bit of, ruching type buckling, but it's not going to be pulling too much that we've got a lot of lines going far down. They're going to stop short. So here's the very rough shape. Now, I like to go in and slightly blend with smudge. Some of it I'm going to leave kind of choppy, and some of it I'm going to make smoother, because this is a fabric and it's not going to be perfectly consistently smooth unless we're dealing with like a nylon or a plasticky kind of faux leather or any of those weird materials. But if it's like a cotton, a threaded, whatever, or even like a wool or fleece type thing, you still got the bumping of the fabrics. And even like alligator skin, which is kind of smooth, but it's still rough. So, yeah. I'm going to use a medium color, but since I'm going for white for the background, I used a very slight off-white because I will want to use white for highlighting it. See how that line of turquoise goes perfectly like straight through and looks weird with the roughage? We can go down to that layer and smudge it to go nice with a kind of at least bend or in a way that the drapery is falling, so it's kind of, see how it's too perfect with the lines? Two layers going, but sure. The middle one by zigzagging back and forth to pull the shadowing so that kind of spreads it out into the middle so you can kind of see. Now, because it's a little darker than I want it to in the middle, we can go back through with brush erase on a low opacity so that we don't lose all of it, but we lose some of what we want to lose. Alright, we are moving on up. It's not perfect, but it'll do for now. We're going to probably, I should make this an on layer, and then we're going to move up in the layers, and we are going to start with cross hatching. You'll notice that I usually use the thicker pen. However, for cross-hatching, it's probably best to stick with like basic, smooth, or one of those ones that kind of stay stiffer because you're cross-hatching. We're going to go over some of those seams that we want to emphasize in particular. And we're going to make a line with the seam, and then we're going to spread out with the cross hatches. You want to flow your cross hatching with the fabric. You know, think of it as like water. It's a fluid motion. You want to fluidly follow the fabric. Here it kind of bends funky, so that's where it gets kind of tricky, and you're just going to want to try to do the best you can to kind of flow with it, but also keep the structure of the cross hatching. The fabric bends in a like L or J shape like this, you can move your cross hatching in that angle like so. Now, I may have overzealously crosshatched. We're not going to worry about that. We're just going to let that go for now. Erase, vector erase, brush erase, all that is a friend, and we will use that in a little bit. But right now we want to make sure we get the structure, the shape right, and we will let the picture tell us, you know, after we're done, what needs to be erased. I'm probably going to make my pen a little smaller here and redo that, because notice how it's getting tighter, and because we're in a smaller space. Cross hatching can be a little time consuming. You can see I'm gonna put it tighter, shorter lines in some of it near like the point where I want it to be darker, to try to give it a gradient of darkness, because it now you can blur or you can smudge to either soften or completely get rid of the crosshatch look, but it does give it that depth you want because it kind of flows the way a fabric would flow. I'm just going to start smudging it to show you guys now so you don't have to watch me do my cross-hatching, which is getting a little sloppy. Which is why sometimes it's good to start smudging and then you can always do on another layer, start more cross-hatching or on the same layer or whatever, just so that way, because after a while, at least for me, it starts to get a little sloppy and I need to kind of break it up into different groupings and just come back to it so that way it still looks nice and neat. I'm going to pull with smudge back and forth. Some of it I might do small circular or just barely move it to keep the cross-hatching shape, but some of it I'm going to just want the shadow. Smudge creates a square rectangular shape, unfortunately, so what you're seeing is me smudging most likely, Bunny. It gave us a lot of depth. Now, you might think this is too much shadow. Again, we can go back in with brush because I've tried to do the pen marks with non-100% opacity and it just doesn't turn out quite the same. So the smudging kind of gets weird. So I found that going back with erase low opacity brush is usually the best way to handle that. And sometimes the dark shapes are actually kind of nice when it's really strong dark, depending on what you want. can use the soft round number 2. Again, I use my typical shading brush or the soft number 2 sometimes. So I'll use the number 4 or the number 2. It just depends partly on my mood. Like I said, the 2 is nice for smoothness. However, the 4 kind of, since it's kind of got that unevenness to it, with, textured items, I find that it sometimes is more beneficial because things aren't going to be smooth. Lighting's going to hit it differently. See how it's not erasing smooth, it's giving it more texture, and that's what I like. So that's why I recommend 4, but if you want to try 2, go for it. So we can move on. I'm not gonna keep doing I'm just letting you see the different parts of the fabric. I'm not going to do the whole entire drapery, so we can move on to something else. We can always come back to this if you guys want, but if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of move on to now doing the highlighting of this particular corner, just so that way we don't spend the whole time just doing one drapery treatment. As you can see, we're cross-hatching the white so to complement the fact that we did the dark. Just shadows aren't enough. Highlighting and shadowing are really important with things like hair and fabric and just some other objects. But this is very, gives a nice extra, it really takes your picture to the next level. If, just like shadowing adds something, highlights add something even as well. So, makes sense, right? for the color, I may want to do a lighter version of that color instead of white. Depends what you want. I'm just going to do white because we're already dealing with white. And again, you can always do the erase factor, and you can go back over also with the color to darken it on top of the white. You can do so many different things to fix something. You don't need to necessarily like worry about it too much. So that's what's so wonderful. It's kind of, they're very fluid, and they can bend with you, and they can work with you. You just have to be willing to work with fabric as well. You could use the cross-hatching brush, however, I'm not necessarily a fan of it, I won't lie. I prefer my own cross-hatching, and that's just me personally. The crosshatch brush right there, to me, it's not the same, because you can bend, you can size it how you want if you do it by hand with the pen. Notice how I tried to do heavier, closer marks, in particular with when we did the black, closer together, and then kind of spread it as we were going out, and bending it with the fabric. With the brush, it's harder to do that, so that's why we got the nice shape where it kind of gradients down, and that's why I prefer to do it my way. With cat, it could actually complicate matters, and that's why I'm not going into any of that or anything. I'm trying to just be as simple as possible because it's almost 3 already and I haven't even gotten to any of like velvet or anything. So we're definitely going to keep going. If you guys can stay, that'd be great. But I want to at least get through with this first so that you guys can at least take away something. Cleaning up with a low opacity brush after we had smudged. Now, I don't know if I told you guys, I forget if I mentioned that I did the white on a new layer, so that way we weren't like, we can always merge it with the black, it's fine, but, you know, if you're running out of layers and stuff, I understand. Happens to me all the time, but it's better because that way when you're pushing and pulling and smudging, you're not messing up the black shadows while you're adding the highlight, so you get the layered look you want. Feeling it might go into 2 as opposed to 1. I was, and I think I told PK we might do an hour and a half, so, but I wasn't sure how long everything would take, so I never really set an exact time. So, but now we're on, if you like how it is, you can leave it, and if you want, you know, depending on your lighting, if you want to add stronger highlights and shadowing, you can. On a new layer, I recommend doing both this time. Now, we're going to do that real quick because this is, you know, when you have stronger sunlight, so you're going to have stronger highlights and stronger shadows. corner there is what, see how much difference it made between just the shadows to add those extra steps of cross-hatching, highlighting, shadowing. Look how much difference that made. Some of you may be thinking, well, this is all fine and dandy, and what if we are using a patterned fabric? Well, I will tell you this. I do this like this first and add my pattern on top. Add the texture, I would, and leave it solid. I would do it now with an overlay. However, we're going to use a pattern, and I made a brush out of one of the pattern for my drapery treatment, since that's what we're working with, to show you how you can use a brush to do it, and then I'll also show you with a pen how we can do this, because I think I can do the brush, but since smudge was recently changed, I'm not going to commit to saying it's going to work. We're just going to try, but I think it will. Sorry about that. I crashed. Alright, let's get back to this. Do it over here. Now, we can always use the on feature to add the shadowing to the pattern itself. And that's why sometimes I wait, because I want to see how because even my outline's not going to match perfect with how the fabric told me it wanted to go. Now, so we need to know the way that it's falling so that we can make the pattern go the same way. The pattern is on a new layer because we're going to be, again, trying to smudge it. Now, I will also show you like doing it with a pen, which can be easier, but sometimes when you're using the same thing over and over again, it's better to use a brush because you get bored of drawing the exact same pattern. Because the turquoise is a completely different fabric that doesn't have a pattern on it, I'm going to erase part of the flower where the turquoise is. For this, you're going to want to make your smudge at a smaller point but a higher opacity so it moves more but less of it moves. When it's a line like this, it's a little less so than when a vector shape actually moves better. So we can also just kind of emphasize it better with going back over it with a pen, but it makes it easier to do it this way when you're doing, it's easier to do one flower with the pen. However, if you're going to keep doing a bunch of them, unless because copying and pasting down layers, not all the folds are the same, so it's not going to work, unfortunately. If you ever saw when it folds under, the pattern doesn't stay perfectly on top of it, so you need to accommodate that. The pattern that falls under the folds is down further than the top pattern, usually, but not always. It depends on the way the fabric's falling. it kind of folds with the fabric better now? Now, let's take it to the next level. If you want, you can just do it on with the brush, or you can do another layer of on. Another layer of on gives you the opportunity to be able to move it around, smudge it, without messing up the pattern you have down. Or if you don't want to use smudge for the shadows, and you just want to put the shadows and make them sharp, you can use on. We'll just, since we've already done the on layer, let's do the on brush, just so that way we're using different techniques and getting more benefit. I hope that it'll be more beneficial out of the class to do it that way, so let's try it that way. It takes longer, but I prefer to use lower opacity and build up the colors, so that way you don't get it too strong by accident and you can adjust it until you want to. Now, you can leave it as it is if you want. And you can also add a little bit of white to highlight. I'm going to leave most of it alone, but I'm going to add a highlight in the one major fold, just because that gives it more depth. How it looks like it's folding with the fabric instead of just being slapped on there. Okay, now let's go to where we can add more texture if you want. Now, if it's like a silk, I would leave it as is. However, this is a cotton, a thick cotton, a very thick cotton, and therefore it's gonna have large, and that's why sometimes I'll leave the cross-hatching without smudging it too much, and I'll add the texture brush in a case where it's a thick fabric that's close up. It's not that close up, but how the fabric brush can add a little extra oomph. I put a black layer down with a white on top and then switch it to overlay. Obviously, the areas that it goes out of, you're going to want to clean up. Do not use the same size for the white and the black, or else they'll just like kind of blend on top of each other. This way, it kind of gives it like lowlights, highlights. Obviously, it's too strong, so we can either go back and erase, or we can just lower the opacity of the layer. However, sometimes it's better to go back and erase, because you can erase where you want to erase it. Voila. There you go. Since we just focused on the corner, we're just going to focus on that as the end with everything, because of course the overlay layer is going to look wrong on the ones we didn't focus on shadowing and highlighting. If you guys want to cover the bows and everything, I'd like to do that in another class if that's what you guys would like. Because we can stop now. If we are going to move on, I'd actually like to move on to another sketch I started for you guys, which will be doing a velvet and lace dress. Here is the run through I did with myself, a dry run. To show you, I used the same technique, and look how I got the velvet, but you can also get a glittery velvet. So I just thought I'd show you, and hopefully we'll get the exact same result. A really rough outline, yeah. I was not the most accurate in my sketches, but I figure we're doing the textures, so that's what matters most. So I don't know how well it's proportioned out, but it'll have to work. So here's the outline. I already made the vector shapes and then smudged them, and I'll pull them up here. They're on another layer. Notice how I didn't use the darkest black. I used like a medium color because we're gonna, since it's a velvet, we need to add some serious shading with the black, so we don't want the black to be overpowering. And then also, I made all three items, parts of it, on a different layer because we're gonna have to erase with a low opacity vector the shirt part because it's transparent, it's a mesh, but I wanted to show that to you guys. And the skirt I did on another layer because it's, if you have it on a different layer, it's a lot easier to actually get the shadow underneath the flare out. And I did the design based on a Google image of a, I think I googled velvet dress, so I put a layer between the top and the bottom layers that I can use on again. And I'll switch between those two because they're going to be the shadows. And we're going to do like basically what we did with the drapes. Same brush, we're going to go through and we're going to add the shadows. On this one, I'm going to limit the amount of smudge I use because velvet is one of those fluffy type materials I mentioned earlier that's going to have, not necessarily fluffy, but you know, it has kind of a plushness to it that causes lighting to hit it irregularly. And so the bumpiness of this brush actually kind of benefits that. I just realized I forgot to mention the pooling of fabrics when we did the drapery. So I'll mention it here. Notice how the line at the side goes up towards the bust. Out of the side goes down away from the bust and gathers there. The things you want to think about when you're making a fabric, clothing, anything. Remember on the drapery how it fell away from the bows on both sides, but it fell down and towards the bows from the upper corners. Something I wanted to talk about when you're making the structure, you need to think about how it's falling, what points it's falling from. Notice how at the start of the arrows is where the gathering and the darker shadows are, at least in the area that we worked on. It would have been elsewhere if we had done the whole thing. So I want to make sure that we have that said, and now we'll go back over to the other one. It's also good to be, yes, you can observe it, but it's also good to be able to think about how it does that and try to imagine it, especially if you are doing works from your imagination, designing, whatever, and or the object's not in front of you and it's just from memory. It's good to be able to wrap your head around that and understand that because it helps you get the right lines. If you're using a reference, that helps. I recommend the first couple of times using a reference until you get the idea and flow of the fabrics, understanding the fluidity, practicing that, especially if you're not good at that. But like I said, when it is a stiff fabric, you can't be as fluid, so you need to just understand these things, be able to think about them, incorporate them, even if you are visually looking at it, being able to understand what you're looking at is important to be able to execute it better. I'm probably going to have to go back and erase some of that extra smudge though on the bottom of the shirt, but notice how we've gotten some nice shadows showing the lines and movement of the fabric, showing it jettisoning out. Obviously adding highlights in a minute will even give you that effect more. gonna do the skirt where I can, since it's on a different layer, you can make the darkness and it'll be, you don't have to worry about being exact with the lines of the shirt. The idea. I'm gonna focus more on the shirt though, just so that we spend more time on that, because there is more lines, ruffling, ruching, whatever you want to call it, and that way we can get more done with less time. Lightly smudge now. I want to leave some of the blurriness, but not a lot. I'm going to add some highlighting using the same brush. I'm going to smudge this. I'm just maybe one spot, but other than that, because again, I want that texture. lightly cross-hatch a few areas to add depth, but not a lot. Again, we're going to smudge and blend slightly the cross-hatching. Since this isn't a cross-hatch thread type fabric, we want to blend it as best as possible so that we don't have cross-hatching left. Whereas it was okay to leave a little bit of the appearance for the other fabric. This fabric, the reason I still use the cross-hatching is because it gives me that nice shape I want, that bends and shadows more like a fabric would. But I do not want to leave any of the open areas that appear like it is cross-hatching. We can go back and erase some of the strong areas. And then we're going to use another brush. I think Mark calls it the Muppet brush. And that's what we're going to use to give the next texture. So we'll be doing that as soon as I clean up with a little bit with the eraser. This brush, the speckle brush. Now, you may have noticed that I did not crush hatch a highlighting. That is correct, because we are going to be doing that with the speckly brush because it gives the lighting of velvet. Now, you may notice velvet seems to be darker, except for when it bends, it gets the lighter color. That's when it reflects light the most. And it usually will have a blue or a purple tinge. You can add this later if you want with like an overlay or whatever, or you can blend it in now with the brush. We'll do it that way. Sometimes it doesn't work right, but usually it does for me. It just, you have to be careful with it. We lightly add our white highlight. I will sometimes make a larger, less opacity black splotch to kind of give it a little more depth. Add the purple blue thing to give it a little, because it does get that purpley blue iridescence. You can also use an overlay layer to give it that slight color if you want, and I'll show you that too. Merge a lot of the layers real quick. like to note that before we speckled, notice how it kind of right now looks like it could be a nice silk or a chiffon possibly, if you wanted, or maybe a taffeta. Obviously with some of those, like if you're going to do a nylon or something, you're going to add more lighting to it to give it that, but this is a good base for that. Which is why I use this technique to get here, because it is a great technique to branch off and build off into other directions. So it gives you a very nice foundation. Something weird happened, I did not stop. I think my big fat finger hit the wrong button. I think I hit stop instead of the microphone. So I don't know if you guys heard me, but I said that I use this as a base layer. Now we can use the overlay technique. I think Sebi showed it in his class. However, we can also use a different way of doing it, not just the emphasizing what we did by putting that on top of that, but we can also use a copy layer, make it the medium color that's neutral in overlay, and then color with on top of that to give us the result we want. See how it does that? Now if we want to add that purple tinge, we can do it like so. Very purple velvet. Like, this is not the black velvet that's got the purple iridescence to it. Now we are using purple velvet, you know, like say you want a Halloween costume and you're using that purple velvet that they use for like royalty or whatever. I used a vector gradient. We can also tone down the purple by gradientizing it again with black so that there's more black on top of the purple, but it's like gradients, so it's not as strong in some areas. It may not be static, my voice is actually starting to freak out, and you might be hearing my parents upstairs walking kind of loud. The boards are squeaking slightly. Better. It might be where I was holding the iPad. There we have, now it looks like a satin with the speckles. It makes it more like a sparkly, which we would use overlay, screen, burn, and dodge to give it more of a sparkly texture. However, I think we're at the 4 o'clock, so we're at the 2-hour mark. Is everybody still good? Do you want me to continue? Or do we want to carry this over for another time? Now we're starting to look more like velvet. I used this brush here, and like I said, it doesn't always turn out quite the same. That's why you need to experiment, and sometimes you just need to start over. I know that sounds kind of cruddy, but sometimes it just looks better than others, although I think it's working right now, but unfortunately the practice run went a little bit nicer, and I apologize for that. I use this brush here to add a little extra oomph for velvet. That we're at a good stopping point then, and we all seem to agree, and we can finish up and do the lace some other time in part 2 class, and then we can go over more to do with like the drapery and the fluid and everything. So that sounds like a plan. See you guys later. Thank you for coming. I hope it was helpful, and have a nice holiday for those of you who have a holiday. You guys, you are too kind. Lie, I tried not to look at how many people were here during class, and I got really nervous when I noticed certain people in the class because it made me feel nervous because I almost idolized their art. So, thank you guys, it means a lot. I'm super blushing.